Welcome to Mind Love, episode 323. Today's episode is all about healing generational beliefs, navigating the mother wound.
These ways that our family systems crash, these ways that we feel kind of cut off or disconnected, it can feel so intimidating to be like, where do we begin? How do we find our way as adults where we're not like a tea bag in their ecosystem, steeping in their ways of being anymore? Like, we get to be free, but we don't want to cut off these people that we love. We don't want to not have them in our lives. So this question of like, how do we exist with them in a totally new way? I think it can feel super threatening for our parents when we start to try and find a new way of relating to them. Like, we're their kid. They're looking at us like, what are you doing?
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. Do you ever find yourself caught between wanting acceptance and wanting others to change? For a good chunk of my life, I was only really tuned into one frequency at a time. Sometimes it was the clear signal of craving someone's acceptance, while other times it was this undeniable noise of just wanting them to change. It wasn't until more recently that I caught on to the fact that these aren't separate channels at all. They're often just different songs playing on the same station. Or in other words, they're two sides of the same coin flipping back and forth in our minds. If you've been listening to Mind Love a while, you've probably heard me share about the tension between my family's views on religion and my own. This has been a journey that's taken me through an in-depth exploration of the Bible, examining its origins, the various interpretations, and the shifts in both the texts and their understandings over time. But this isn't an episode about the Bible. I was, however, raised religious, so I can appreciate that it might be tough for my mom in particular to see me forging my own spiritual path. Not that the insights I've reached are exactly new or revolutionary. They echo some of the oldest spiritual teachings, but that's not really the point. It gets me thinking, though. After all the soul-searching that I've done, how would I react if my kids ended up finding their own path within religion? At the very least, it gives me a lot of compassion for what my mom's going through, especially considering that within her religious framework, my entire soul is at stake. Last year, I was listening to the audiobook version of Byron Katie's Loving What Is. I'm particularly fond of the audiobook version because it includes recordings of actual live workshops. And somehow, every person who stood up to be counseled by her within the workshop felt like this fractal representation of a part of my life. One guy stood up and voiced that he just wants to be accepted by his family and how they don't understand his beliefs and therefore don't accept him. They're close-minded and religious and therefore judgmental of any path that doesn't fall within the dogmatic views of evangelical Christian. Wow, I could relate. My entire being was invested in her response. Well, she had him write out the whole story that he was telling himself, which is basically his version of reality as it is. They don't understand me. They judge me for my beliefs. They're close-minded to a different way of being. And then she said, "Now turn it around." And he slowly turned around every sentence that he wrote. This is her method, if you know it. I don't understand them. I judge them for their beliefs. I'm close-minded to a different way of being. You could feel his realization setting in, just as mine was setting in too. All of these years I've been the victim in my own story, not fully recognizing that I was also playing the very role that I resented in them. But here's the thing. This insight has not miraculously smoothed out all of the rough edges. However, it does allow me to take a step back and view things from a fresh perspective. One where I feel less like I'm under personal attack, What I see now, though, is that when it comes to someone as close to me as my mother, everything feels more personal. And I think it feels that way because ultimately, I want her to be proud of me. Here's another example. Parenting styles can bring out this other unique kind of tension, which honestly deserves its own dedicated episode, and I might have already done that. Well, I've shared stories with so many other newish moms, and for some reason, issues came up with their mothers, who they've always been close to, right when they started parenting. Our theory is that when we parent differently, it might unintentionally feel like a slight to our mothers. It's as though our different methods imply, I think there's a better way, even if that's not the message that we want to send. Both of these stories really boil down to what some call the mother wound. It's this tricky thing where we're trying to be our own person, but we also just want that nod from our moms, like, hey, you're doing great. It's about navigating the delicate balance between seeking our mother's pride and approval while also honoring our own truths and the unique ways that we choose to live our lives, raise our children, and even rest our souls. So that's what we're talking about today. Our guest is one of my favorite people and close friends, Ashley Stahl. She's been on the show a few other times, and I'm so glad to have her back. So you'll notice that this is probably more of a conversation because this episode is also airing on her podcast. Although she is currently without children, she's found that suddenly her relationship with her own mom is experiencing a little more turbulence than usual. So as friends tend to do, we're going deep into our experiences. And as podcasters tend to do, we are sharing our mess with all of you in hopes that it brings relatability, a little insight, and maybe even some compassion and healing. Ashley Stahl is the author of U-Turn, Get Unstuck, Discover Your Direction, and Design Your Dream Career. She's an amazing career coach, and she's the host of the podcast of the same name, U-Turn. So 3 key things we will learn are the truth about the barriers hindering open and inquisitive conversations, how the need for acceptance hinders our boundaries, and the mysterious connection between your mother and your own sense of self. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Ashley Stahl to the show.
Hello, friends.
Hello, friends. This is going to be a super special episode. I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel like because we were catching up before this, and it's like there's a part of me that wants to be in podcast energy and be like, podcast, but we were just talking about our mother wounds and in that vibe. So yeah, like I'm almost kind of curious, maybe for both of us to share, like what the heck is going on in the most respectful way to our moms.
I fully believe that we are put into the situations our souls choose, whatever. Those mothers are there for exactly the growth that we need. That's my belief. And so I will give a little recap where I had children a couple of years ago, and there's something about that. And from what I hear from my friends, there is something about that it just digs up all of the old stuff.
Yeah.
And your mother sees you in all of the versions of you. And when you see somebody in all their versions, I feel like it's very easy to cling to one of those versions. It's actually really difficult to be in a relationship with somebody in really closely if you're not aware of this and allow them to flow through all of the phases of their life with acceptance. At least that's what I've noticed. Because, you know, you have a friend who burned you once, and it might be 4 years later, but like then you get into a situation and you're a little hesitant. Like it's just kind of the natural instinct to remember and whatever. And I will say I put my mom through some hell in my 20s. It was pretty intense. Some of the poor life decisions I've made, the tears she probably cried on a nightly basis. And I know there's this huge part of her that's so proud of where I've come out, but I know that it's also difficult because I am the type of person that has actively been evolving through my entire life, especially in the last 10 years. And so for her, we get together and it's like, well, who's Melissa going to be today? And for me, I'm just sort of expanding myself and feeling more into the version of me that I am. And while I do that, I'm actually really discovering who I am. I used to be such a go with the flow person in not all the positive ways, in the ways of like, oh, what do you want to do? Oh, what do you like? Oh, this is what I'm going to be because you are. This is the new group that I'm in, so I'm just going to mesh with them. And I prided myself on just being easy to sort of mesh with other people and like I said, go with the flow until I realized at some point that I didn't really know who I was or what I liked or what my preferences were. And I guess it's really easy when you're drinking and doing drugs all the time. It's like, of course I'm happy. I'm on copious amounts of Molly right now. But then now I'm in a whole different phase of my life and I every day I'm choosing something new and deciding what's better for me. And I might change that, but a lot of the things are things that stick, like just especially health areas and things like that. Well, anyways, it's been digging up all of the things and it just feels like we are rubbing up on each other or like maybe wishing each other was different in a way. And I see a very hypocritical side of it too. I was just journaling about it yesterday where I'm like, I just wish that I wouldn't feel this push to change who I am or not an acceptance. And I'm like, well, am I not doing that very same thing to her back? And I know I rambled a little bit, but I'm right in the middle of it.
No, well, even if we start here, like I've had a really interesting realization lately where I was like, okay, I'm 36 years old and I didn't really get out of my parents' house fully. And I don't say that in a bad way. Like they were a pretty loving bunch of coconuts, like they loved me. But I got out of their house probably fully at like 22, 23. And so when I look at my life, I'm like, wow, I spent 23 years steeping like a tea bag in their ecosystem. And I've only spent 13 years in my own ecosystem, in my own way of being. And I feel like that's been really helpful for me in realizing like, okay, Ashley, be nice to yourself because you spent way more time redoing those same patterns of thinking, of being in the world, of operating in your parents' ecosystem than you have in your own. And it takes time to change. And when you are up against patterns and ways of living that you've experienced for decades, it's almost like we forget that we're kind of new to being on our own flow with ourselves. Even though you're a mother and you have kids, it's like, I don't know. And I feel that pressure being in the self-development world. It's like, okay, I'm not allowed to like feel like I want to lose my mind at my own mother because I love her. And I'm allegedly supposed to be this practitioner that is highly regulated and knows what to do with her nervous system. But the truth is, like, there's not enough psychology degrees or group programs or certifications to undo 23 years of someone else's belief system. Like even if you want to collect some of the beliefs they imparted on you that are really good. And I know I was just telling you before we recorded, Melissa, that like I was talking to Danielle Laporte the other day and sending her a voice note being like, man, like, I thought that I grew past this. Like, I thought that I was doing really well. So either I didn't grow or it's like a bad video game of whack-a-mole and I'm on to the next level. And at first, when she voice noted me back and said, well, the fact that it's coming up again probably means you've done some healing, but you have more capacity for the next level. At first, when she said that, it kind of felt to me like what people say when a bird shits on your head, like, oh, that's good luck, like finding the silver lining in a shitty thing. I'm like, me and my mom are really like in a process right now of finding our ways with each other. And I don't feel like it's good luck that this just shit on my head. I don't feel like it means that I have more capacity that this situation just shit on my head. But I'm realizing like, no, I think it's true. I think there were some issues in the dynamics in the family ecosystem that I had before that I was just like, I can't face these. I don't have the capacity. And I feel like our bodies kind of know that when we're up against something. It's like our psyche is like cross wiring and diffusing where we're just like, we don't know how to do this yet. And so I'm trying to take my mother wound stuff right now. And those of you who don't know mother wound, to me, it means like healing some of the patterns that you kept in place to keep your mom happy or to keep your mom comfortable. I don't know how you would define it. I made that up if that's your definition.
You know what's funny? We spend so much time feeding our minds, reading books, listening to podcasts, learning new things, but then we grab whatever's convenient to feed our bodies. And I get it. Life is busy, and sometimes a drive-through feels like the only option. But that's why I take Field of Greens. It's a greens powder made with whole organic fruits and vegetables. No extracts, no lab-made stuff, and just 1 scoop a day gives you simple, real nutrition. Field of Greens feeds your body with fruits and vegetables medically chosen to support your heart, vital organs, and immune system. And let me tell you something. Since I started taking it, I've noticed these little changes that show me how nutrient depleted I must have been before. Like the ridges in my nails, gone. My sleep, so much better. And my stomach just feels happy. You know that dreaded afternoon crash that has you reaching for more coffee or sugary snacks? Well, that's not happening for me anymore. When your body is actually nourished, it runs so much better. I've tried other greens powders before, but Field of Greens is genuinely different. The quality is next level and you can taste it. It's become my go-to, especially on those days when my eating isn't exactly Instagram worthy, because we all have those days, right? And here's the thing. They are so confident that you'll love it too, that they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. That's how much they believe in their product. So I got you 15% off your first order and free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code MINDLOVE. That's promo code MINDLOVE at fieldofgreens.com. fieldofgreens.com. I don't know why it took me so long to invest in good bedding. I resisted it for years, but something flipped in me about 3 years ago. And now I'm basically a pillow connoisseur. I've tried them all, and I get weirdly excited about good bedding. Because here's the thing, we spend a third of our lives in bed, and the quality of that time affects literally everything else, which is why I'm so excited to tell you about my latest obsession, Lagoon Sleep Pillows. What sets them apart is their matching system. You take a quick 2-minute quiz about your sleep style and your preferences, and then they match you with your perfect pillow. I was matched with their Otter pillow, and I am so impressed. Lately, I've just needed more support, and this seems to cradle me in all the right places. I'm also low-key obsessed with their travel pillow, which I use for way more than just travel. I actually hug it, use it as leg support, and of course, take it on trips with me. Well, the secret is in their adjustable fill. You can add or remove it to get that perfect alignment for your spine. A study even found that the right supportive pillow can improve sleep quality by 63%. And Lagoon lets you try their matched pillow for 100 nights risk-free. Free returns, no questions asked. Falling asleep has never been easier. I toss and turn less and just wake up feeling refreshed every morning. Go to lagoonsleep.com and take their awesome 2-minute sleep quiz to find your match. Use the code MIND for 15% off your first purchase.
I kind of have always viewed it as a more two-way street because, like I said, I really do believe in the kind of spiritual aspect of that. Like, this relationship is there for a reason. My personality type is there, and we're there to rub up against each other until we become the smooth gems that we are meant to be, you know? And with my situation, it's just difficult because I know how loving she is. And so sometimes I get really disappointed in myself. Like you said, like you become, you think you should be the one that has your nervous system regulated. And I was just speaking to somebody who I really admire about the same situation. And she stopped me in the middle of it. And she said, first of all, there's a reason that you feel like your younger self when you're talking, when you're getting into some of these arguments, because a lot of our arguments are about our different views. Whereas I have a very broad spiritual perspective. She's fundamentalist religion. And I say this with love for both sides, but like a lot of that is black and white thinking That's what this woman told me. She's like,
Yeah.
that's black and white thinking. It can regress you a lot. So that is why that is happening, possibly. And additionally, don't confuse having a child fit with wanting to be accepted, or wanting to change somebody with wanting to be accepted. And so whereas I was kind of identifying the hypocritical things of like, why does this have to be so difficult? Can't she just do this? And I'm like, but that's against feeling like she's asking me, why can't you just be this? Why, like, come back to my views or whatever it is. And I'm like, so we both want each other to change. Byron Katie helped me with that one. Like, I definitely am. And it's like, well, is it really wanting her to change as much as wanting to accept me? Is that a form of change? It sort of is. How can I be okay in this? And what I recognize is it's not just like, the reason it feels to me like so much pressure is because I have a codependency issue. It's this deep desire to be accepted and to be like, I want my mom to be proud of me. And her not seeing, so many people are inspired by the way that I view the world, whereas my mom just has a whole different view through the lens of religion. And so a lot of the things that I believe in that have really helped me can be blasphemy or whatever it is, like almost evil. And that's such a weird place to be in. It's weird when someone you love is terrified that you're going to go to hell. Because on one hand, like, if you tell someone to go to hell, that's like a mean thing to say. Like, I believe you're going to hell is not a nice thing to say. But it's not coming from that place. It's coming from like an actual fear. And I was there. I remember being like 7 years old when I still believed all of those things and thinking my grandma was going to go to hell because she just wouldn't accept Jesus in the way that I did. And it was terrifying and stressful. And with everything going on in the world and believing that the end times are near, like, I can only imagine how stressful that is. And so there's so many layers and so many ways that you can look at it. And it's just like, well, what feels true now? And then once, like you said, the whack-a-mole thing, you kind of beat that, then it's like, I start to see it through a different lens, a slightly more evolved lens. But there's still more facets of that need to be sanded down.
Yeah. And I think everybody has different wounds with their parents, right? Like, it's so weird because my dad was really very loving, also very chaotic when I was growing up. And so I used to think in therapy, like, oh, all my issues are with my dad. He was like totally a psycho when I was a kid. Not towards me. He was very loving towards me, but he was so stressed out. He lost all of it, like all of his money in his first business. And he spent a lot of my adolescence like rebuilding himself. And he's done so beautifully, but not without a whole lot of stress along the way. And he wasn't really available to me because he was super stressed and just not able to sit with a kid who had, wanted attention. And so I think growing up, when I started therapy, I was like, oh, I have so much to talk about about my dad. And I've realized as the years have gone on, I'm like, yeah, his anxiety has given me my own anxiety because we couldn't co-regulate, right? So like growing up, he had so much anxiety that I couldn't turn to him when I had fear, and he couldn't help me regulate. And I think a lot of people listening, we either learn how to self-soothe or we don't. And a lot of our self-soothing comes from parents who help us work through hard moments. And if we never got that from them, it's like we didn't learn how to regulate ourselves. And so for years, I was like, oh, my issues are going to be with my dad. But the more that I've gotten into therapy, it's so weird because I always thought my mom was my best friend. And in a lot of ways, she is such a special person to me and I love her a lot. But we couldn't be more different. Like, she grew up in a family where and I think that this is helpful for everyone, is to just look in the mirror and say, like, what do I know to be true about my parents' upbringing, like my mom specifically? And I know the Hoffman process does a lot of this. And for a while, I was able to just have compassion for her upbringing and not feel sad for myself about certain things she couldn't give me. So for example, like her parents divorced, her mom had severe depression, her mom didn't get out of bed. So she kind of felt a sense of survival through togetherness with her brothers. And for her, intimacy was not deep conversation. It was just existing in the same space together and knowing that you're there for each other. And for me as a kid, that felt so fucking lonely. Like, that was not how I knew. Like, I grew up in this body feeling like I couldn't even fit in my body. Like, I had so many thoughts. I used to write poetry when I was 10. And if I showed my mom or my dad any of it, I think they would be like proud of me, but then they would kind of glaze over like they didn't know what to do with me. Like I had so many emotions and they hadn't made themselves Jedi warriors of their own emotions yet, let alone taking this little girl with these poems. So I remember my dad like stressed as he could ever be about work and being like, I'm so proud of you, great writer. But he probably wasn't able to feel what I was really writing in my poems. And I remember my mom, I mean, her mantra growing up was very like, let's not go there. Like, why talk about that? It is what it is. The past is in the past. Like a lot of conflict avoiding concepts that she really lived by. And so I grew up feeling very much like, well, I want to go there. I want to talk about my feelings. And in the same way, when you're kind of like on a diet and you have a bite of a cookie, maybe you like treat yourself and the cookie doesn't really taste that good and you're like, oh, this isn't worth the calories. You know that feeling? Like growing up in LA, I do. So for me, it's like, when you bite into the cookie again, you're like, I hope it tastes different the next time. Like I really want this to taste good. I feel like that in my relationship with my parents sometimes, where I'm like, these are really good people. They don't necessarily totally get me. I kind of feel like a stranger. But I'm going to bite into this cookie again and see if I share something wildly personal with them. And let's see if they can handle it this time. And it's like every time they kind of look at me like, what? But they're not judgmental. They just don't know what to do with it. And so it's like this deep pain that has lived on inside of me for a lot of my life of like, I want to be seen. I want to be understood. And I feel like a black sheep. I feel like I couldn't be further away from this ecosystem. And I feel like a lot of people, whatever the patterns are of how their parents have showed up, whatever their parents' upbringings are of like, I know my dad, his mom never told him she loved him. And so I grew up with, not only him being stressed out, but like he really wanted love from my mom. So I remember as kids, we'd go to the movies and me and my little brother would fight over who would sit next to our mom because we both wanted to be like next to our mom. And he wanted that coveted seat too, because he didn't get love from his mom either. So it's like these ways that our family systems crash, these ways that we feel kind of cut off or disconnected, it can feel so intimidating to be like, where do we begin? How do we find our way as adults where we're not like a tea bag in their ecosystem, steeping in their ways of being anymore? Like we get to be free, but we don't want to cut off these people that we love. We don't want to not have them in our lives. So this question of like, how do we exist with them in a totally new way? I think it can feel super threatening for our parents when we start to try and find a new way of relating to them. Like we're their kid. They're looking at us like, what are you doing? Like my parents coming on vacation and me telling them like, hey, you can't stay with me. It's a little too much. That was really upsetting for them. Like what? We want to be with you,
Yeah.
And I think that's all part of healing the wound, right? Is like having to sit in those moments of disconnect of like, okay, they don't really understand me right now. And they're hurt by me right now because I'm trying to put these boundaries up for me to be a normal person and not be resentful, not feel smothered, not feel uncomfortable. And it's like having to sit in that pain of like, you're causing them pain in some way by setting up new rules. And they don't have a choice but to kind of like work within those. I don't know. Have you tried setting any boundaries with your mom?
Oh, yeah. I'm not the best at enforcing them. Yes and no. But in some ways, it's difficult because we don't have a lot of time where we are going to be staying in the same place. And because it's been difficult, we haven't done it much anyways. There just inevitably is some sort of blow up. And I think we both end up, I know that I'm partially responsible because like I said, it's like I regress. But if you think about it, like so much of our developmental years, that 0 to 7 years old is like what those beliefs get ingrained in us. The ways of connecting get ingrained in us. That's when we are in, as you called it, their ecosystem. And so now, yes, I've been an adult and so learning this new way to connect is also completely different in that when we're children, at least for me, our big fights, I was not in the power position. And so it would be me. Yes, there were a lot of times she was great at like kind of saying like I could have done this better, blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, I was the one getting in trouble. And then it's the way I talk to her, like that. I look back at being a child and, oh my gosh, so frustrating because you get angry and then you yell. I still get angry and yell sometimes, but then you're in trouble for more back then. You don't get really in trouble as an adult. And so I think we're both figuring out just how it is to handle that. But the boundary thing, for me, I tend to retreat. And so I'll just go with like a not speaking for a little while. We've never gone like long periods of time where we haven't talked. But I think the deepest grief that I've felt in the last couple of years, other than my dog dying, it's been through these hardships. And it's because, like I've talked about, I know that she wants the best for me. She's been my biggest support system in different ways. But as a child, I recognize, like, one of the things that I'm learning about now, having children, about growth mindset and how you praise kids and things like that. Well, I was always the smart one, and my grandma was like, oh, she's going to be a millionaire. And like, I was the smart kid in the family. And so I was used to like giving my report cards and just getting all this praise. And I did something new and I'd get all this praise. And I was a good writer and I'd get all this praise. And now it's like, I'll do something that I'm very proud of, and instead of praise, there's sort of resistance. And it's because spirituality is such a big part of my life now. I've just gone, like, it guides my every direction. I actually feel like I have a relationship with God in a way. And it's even still hard for me to say it because of my background. It's easier for me to say something like
Universe.
my relationship with the universe or with source. But that's something that I'm actively working on right now, because I feel like not being able to say God is a block to the next step of my growth. So I've been working on that. But it's very difficult to not be able to talk to somebody about something that's so big for me.
Yeah.
And A Course in Miracles calls it a special relationship, and it defines special relationships basically by codependency. Like, you need somebody to accept you or be a part of your life in order for you to feel happy and fulfilled. And although that sounds more extreme than this situation, if I really dig deep and let myself see it, that is true. Like, I get frustrated because I feel like I'm not being accepted and I'm never going to be seen in this area. And it's one thing if we just sort of both did our own things in that area, but like we have different beliefs, and she believes she needs to convert me. And I believe that both of our paths can get us to the same place. And so, I don't know. I'm working on acceptance just as much as I want to be accepted. And I believe that even learning to be accepting with the relationship as it is, might transform the world that I'm seeing, might transform the perception, might transform the energy that I'm getting back. So I'm still right in the middle of it. I'm still figuring it out, to be fair.
Well, I think a lot of people listening probably don't even know how much they have, like, a mother or a father wound.
We're all searching for something better in life, right? Better habits, better mindset, better relationships. But when it comes to hiring, searching isn't always the best approach. Instead of searching, why not match? That's where Indeed comes in. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. It's your go-to matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors. Their matching engine helps you find quality candidates fast. And I mean really fast. Did you know that in the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed worldwide? That's what I love about Indeed. It's like having a mindful hiring assistant. Instead of getting overwhelmed by endless resumes, you can schedule, screen, and message candidates all in one place. The platform actually learns your preferences, so the more you use it, the better it gets at finding people who align with your vision. And get this, 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. That's why more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide use Indeed to hire great talent fast. I just love that it keeps all of my hiring processes organized. I can do everything right there instead of having spreadsheets and notes and video call links. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
I'm still right in the middle of it. I'm still figuring it out,
Yeah.
to be fair.
Well, I think a lot of people listening probably don't even know how much they have like a mother or a father wound. Like they might not be aware that when they're in their presence of one of their parents or both, they feel like they need to be a certain way and they don't feel like they have the freedom to set new boundaries and change the way it is because number one, it hurts. It hurts yourself. Like it feels bad to say like, hey, sorry, this way that you receive love from me, of me making time for you and staying under the same roof with you or going on these long trips with you, this is about to change. I'm going to take away the thing that you super enjoy so that I can be sane again. And I don't have to live in the same way that we used to live, right? It's like just the pain that you know it might inflict upon the parent. Because even though you set a boundary nicely, people can still feel a boundary and that's a change and it can hurt. So it's like, I think like having to make peace with like, this is happening, number one. And number two, like you having to be with yourself. Like you said, like it's hard for you to keep boundaries up, and to keep upholding what you need. That's a practice. And that requires a lot of self-soothing. And like I was saying before, as kids, sometimes we didn't really learn how to regulate because maybe our parent wasn't available to sit with us in our pain and help us learn how to be with pain, help us learn the message that pain moves and we can sit with it and it's safe to feel it and just to sit with it. A lot of people are afraid of feeling their feelings. When I look at my family ecosystem, I had the weirdest, most interesting conversation with this little cousin on my recent family trip. I feel like you would find it such a trip, pun intended. So I have this little cousin, Braden. He is such a sweet little boy. And my cousin, who is his father, so I guess he's my second cousin, this little boy, he's a little more like, I don't know, how do I describe it? Like right wing, very conservative, loves hunting and like all these things that, whatever, that's what he likes to do. So Braden has been taken on tour across America and they kept saying that he's been winning shooting contests. And I'm like, are 11-year-olds allowed to shoot a gun? Like, what are these? And then they revealed to me, no, it's archery. So like bow and arrow. I'm like, wow, like, and he's like, yeah, but they're real sharp. That's what my little 11-year-old cousin said to me. And so we went to dinner the other night and he was talking about how at his school he sees kids get bullied. And I asked him, I'm like, Braden, do you get bullied? And he said to me, well, no, because I'm the tallest in my class. I'm like, how tall are you? And he's like 4'11". And I'm like, all right, that sounds pretty big for an 11-year-old. And he's like, yeah, nobody messes with me because I'm so big. And I'm like, okay, so what about your friends? Like, what do you do when they're getting bullied? What do you hear happen? And he was telling me that like two of his friends were fighting physically because they were trying to prove who was the better friend to him. I'm like, wow. And I told him something and I could see he's a very intelligent little boy. I could see he fully clicked in with me. I said, Braden, have you ever heard of a therapist? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, I'm a coach. So I coach people like in their careers and in their businesses, but I do some psychology stuff, just like a therapist. And he like nodded his head. And I'm like, you have no idea how many adults older than your dad, and his like little eyes looking at me, like his 4'11" body. And he's looking at me and I'm like, you have no idea how many adults older than me, older than your dad, have sat in the chair across from me, like I'm their therapist. And they cry and they cry and they cry over something that someone said to them when they were your age. And I could see him like surprised, like, really? They remember, like when they were 11, like he looked at his dad, like he's so old. Like, how does he think about anything from now? And I told him, I'm like, the things that kids say to each other where you are in school, it matters. And like, it hurts people forever if it's really mean sometimes. And I'm like, I don't want you to get involved when you see somebody get bullied because I don't want you to get hurt. But if you could do anything to help undo that, it would be really nice of you to do it. But don't do it just because you think you should. Do it if you want to. And he nodded and he kind of just leaned in, and it was like so profound for me to see like an 11-year-old kid. And then he started to talk about how he reads books and he's reading series. And I think he's pretty intellectually gifted, but I think everybody thinks the children in their family are gifted, or especially their own kids. Yeah, exactly. Everybody's like, my kid is a genius. So I don't know, but I did feel like, I was like, wow, this kid feels pretty gifted. So I was like, do you know what else? And he's like, what? And I'm like, you're 11 years old. According to the research, when you're 12 years old, most of your beliefs about the world are pretty set. And he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, what you believe about money, about love, about marriage, about what you can do, most of it's pretty set. So after you turn 12, your brain usually believes what it believes, and it's going to take a little more work to change it. Like you're a sponge right now. And he's like, well, how do I know what I believe? And I'm like having this crazy conversation with an 11-year-old, you know? And I'm like, well, you see your dad, like, because my cousin, his father was talking about how he goes to work and he has a full-time job and then he does an after-hours job. And I'm like, I bet you see your dad and he's working a lot, right? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, you probably believe that you're going to have to work a lot one day to like get by. And he's like, sometimes, yeah. I'm like, well, do you ever see kids at school where maybe they have parents who have a lot of money? He's like, yeah. I'm like, do you ever hear them say anything about money? And he's like, yeah, my friend Jimmy thinks he's going to be so rich. I'm like, exactly. He thinks that he can do that because that's what he's watching his parents do. I'm like, it doesn't mean that everybody thinks what they see their parents doing is what they're going to do, but it's tempting to think that way because that's just what you see all the time. And I looked at my cousin, like my older cousin, who's his dad, and I was like, you should really send him abroad. He has such a spongy mind. Like, you should send him somewhere and expose him to like new types of people. Like, he's so in suburban California. Like, send him somewhere, show him the world. And my cousin responded in a way that really stuck with me. He's like, why would I send him to Europe? I don't like Europe. And I looked at my cousin and I'm like, here, this is how it works. I'm like, he believes that it's not a fun place. So you might not have an interest in it because that's what your parents believe. So I just had this interesting conversation where I was like, how do I not overstep boundaries, but like infuse some possibility into this kid that I'm related to? And I walked away from the dinner and I just felt like, damn, that's so crazy how much of a sponge these kids are, how much impact we get to make. And yeah, the conversation has really sat with me thinking about like a lot of our wounds from our parents and how a lot of them have to do with like these moments where we just believe the world is the way they think it is. And then we get older and we have this weird reckoning of like, wait a minute, these people are just people. They're not anything but. And we don't have to think what they think. We don't have to live how they live. And we don't have to feel shame or uncomfortable for showing them who we are, how we want to live. And those moments of having to like differentiate and be your own person from your family, it can feel like you're abandoning them. It can feel like you're betraying them, like at its worst, or that you're a mean person. And so I don't know if I did anything for my little baby cousin Brayden, but I hope I did.
I think you did. You never know the things that are going to stick with people. And some of the things that stick with me the most from my childhood was the one perspective that differed from what I was seeing everywhere else. I'm like, oh, it's like seeing a crack in the wall and a little glimmer of the light that like maybe there's something beyond that. But when I'm old enough, I'll break through that wall. And so I believe that part of the reason, I know that a huge reason that things are coming up is because I'm in a stage in life where I'm consciously choosing how to parent. I feel that is almost impossible to do without comparing it to your childhood because you're looking back and you're taking what worked for me and what didn't. And in that process, you're identifying all of these things that didn't work or that you feel didn't work. And I might be right, I might be wrong. It's very easy to look through, like all of a sudden you feel one way and then you look at a past situation and you're looking at it through that lens and it's different from what you experienced back then. It's like, no, I think I always hated that girl, and like all of a sudden you can see this whole pattern of how she was an awful friend, but it took you 10 years to realize. And during that whole time, you would have said completely otherwise. Well, I think the same thing happens with parenting, and it's difficult to see your children parenting in a different way because without saying anything, that somehow it's a form of rejection. It feels like a form of rejection. And so when I'm handing my kids over, there's all of these preferences and it's different than what she did. And so there's different times that it comes up where it's like, well, if I was just that bad. And for me, like you, I like to dive into things. Like, I believe I had a great childhood. I was showered with love. And there's things that I now see affected me negatively. Mm-hmm. And there's things that are also both sides. One of those things is we moved a lot. And we did and we didn't. After second grade, I didn't move a lot. But then our school kept changing systems. And so we had a from traditional to a track system. I got split up with people, and then a new school got built and I got split up with people. And like, but I didn't stay in the same space very long. And before second grade, I was in like 4 or 5 different schools. And so I like to bring that up because there's a lot of positives about that. I love that I'm independent. I love that I make friends easily. I love that I can kind of just like fit in different places from the outside. But on the flip side of that, on the inside, yes, I look like I'm fitting in everywhere, but I always kind of feel like I'm this isolated person in my own little body vehicle, not really energetically attuned with everybody sometimes. Or we were talking about before how I've just always have belonging issues. Like I always feel a little bit left out, or I almost feel like I yearn for specific types of friendships a little bit more than I should. Or maybe I don't let myself get as close as I can because I'm not used to doing it, or I'm afraid that it's going to be taken away. I would love to just be able to talk about these things.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes I can also see how it feels like a criticism about the parenting. And so it's a very fine line depending on how you grew up. And like you said, generations before us didn't know how to talk about this. And so there's not the space to receive these things with an inquisitive mind. There's almost like there's a hard candy shell built up around it already. And so you're like trying to melt it away, but the process is messy. And so we've had a ton of breakthroughs, even just recently, where I was talking about that. And she's just like, it just feels like this, and this. And like, you think I did such a bad job, but I also did this, and this. And I could feel my heart crack open. And I could see how I was creating a story around my experience with her, because we do that. And all of a sudden I'm feeling this. So I see the whole thing through the lens of anger, or the whole thing through the lens of judgment, or the whole thing. And I have to be very careful, because I can stop and get into a softer moment and look back and see our whole life as such a beautiful thing. Because like I said, like I want to make it very clear that I'm so grateful, especially compared to some relationships that I hear, to have the mother that I have. And I do believe that we're here to kind of hone each other. And sometimes it's difficult and I cry. And sometimes I'm so glad that I can just talk to her about anything. And sometimes it feels like I can't talk to her about anything. Like it's everything. And I think we have this tendency, based on what we're feeling, to just define things.
Yeah.
But it's everything at once. Cheryl Strayed recently told me that, because I was looking back on my past, and I even do that with my 20s, because I did go through such a tumultuous time, that it's almost like I found myself sometimes being ashamed of my 20-something-year-old self. Mm-hmm. And with that comes, well, what relationships did I have back then? Oh, we got in that fight. It must have been my fault. Or what was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, oh, we haven't talked in a long time. Oh, do you still like me now? Because back then I feel like I was a shit show. Like things like that will kind of come out. But Cheryl reminded me that she gets that a lot, where people are like, can you believe that you were doing heroin just this long ago and now you've got this beautiful life? And she's like, and sometimes it's not beautiful. And she's like, and also that screwed up young girl who got me in all that trouble is also the one who chose to get me out of it, is also the one who chose to walk the Pacific Crest Trail and start a new life. Mm-hmm. And so I have to remind myself, it's like I've compartmentalized all these different things. And sometimes I do regress and I'm like, I'm so sorry that I put you through that. And then I'm like, other times I'm like, maybe I did that because of this. And it just is what it is. And so to be able to hold space for all of those things, for the love and the hardship and the struggle and your mistakes and your achievements, and see that we are like so multifaceted, it helps me to have more compassion for who I am now, and not beat myself up when I do regress or whatever it is. Like Ram Dass says, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a weekend with your family.
Yeah, oh my God. You're bringing up so many good points. I feel like when I think about our inner child, like if little me was standing next to me in certain moments, and I have a pretty healthy and kind family who's very loving. But if 3-year-old me was standing next to me in certain moments where my dad was having a meltdown and I was the adult there, I would take her and protect her and be like, no, you don't need to watch this. Like, this isn't for you to take on. This is his dysregulation. You don't need to be worried and in this stressful environment. And so I almost feel like as adults, like this whole idea of like reparenting ourselves is about looking at those moments and being like, all right, now I'm in charge of taking care of me and I get to call the shots. And like, how do I want to protect me? How do I want to look out for me? And it's not that our parents are people that we need to protect ourselves from. They love us. And I so related to what you said because my mom, like, she had a really rough upbringing, my dad, and they've tried so hard to give me everything they didn't get. And they're human, and we have disconnects, and I need to figure it out. And it's really painful for me sometimes. It's like holding all of it. And one of the biggest things I've learned, not just in my relationship with my family, but with everyone, is I value honesty and integrity so much. And my partner, actually, he's been really huge in helping me see this. Like, that's the way I relate to people, is by being radically honest. So
Me too.
he was like, not everybody actually deserves your honesty. It's not that they're not worthy of your honesty. It's that like you're going overboard and sharing something that's actually creating more disconnect than connection. Oh, and that has been huge for me to be like, okay, I don't need to give a State of the Union right now about how pissed off I am or how wrong that was in my opinion or how it should be. Sometimes it's not about having silence from a place of retreating, but from a place of like really reflecting, like what is actually going to move the needle in these dynamics? Like what is actually going to move us forward? And I've actually realized, and this has probably been my biggest breakthrough with my mother wound, is that boundaries are actually something that happen in silence a lot of the times. It's not about being toxic and manipulative, but like, here's what I've learned. Like, for example, if we have a family trip, I learned that I like to become the coordinator. I like to do a bunch of things to like make sure it's happening, but I actually hate doing it because it's pretty unforgiving. Nobody actually realizes I'm trying to do it and offer it up. And then it gets overboard and everybody wants all these things. And I'm like, why the hell am I doing all of this? And so one of the things I realized is like, take a look at the things you're giving that you're not being asked to give, because sometimes you're like, it's like people don't notice when you're being generous if they didn't ask something of you. You know, if you're just being in your eyes generous, maybe you're giving something the other person isn't registering as generosity because they aren't asking for it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't give it, but don't give it and get resentful when you're giving it. Like, look at all I'm doing, right? And the second thing I've learned is just around boundaries, it's like they don't always require a conversation. So now it's like, I don't need to do a little State of the Union and tell everyone, like, hey, I'm no longer the group coordinator. This is a boundary. Da da. Instead, when they try to do it, I'm like, I don't have time for that, you know, or like, I'm not available to do that. You know, just let me know a place and a time and I'll be there. So it's like starting to just be like, oh, no, this is a no. Sorry, I can't. And it doesn't make you a bad person, but I think that's the wound and that's the work, right? Is healing in those moments where you're like, I want to give and not be uncomfortable with everybody else being uncomfortable. But ultimately, it's like those moments with that little 3-year-old you standing next to you where it's like, do you really want to put this tiny you through this anymore? Like, it's not for, it doesn't have to be that way. So yeah, it's funny. I thought I needed to have all these conversations to heal my family wounds, but I've realized like I don't need any State of the Unions pretty much. Like if you have a parent that's like coming at you and saying things that you need them to be more respectful in their communication, you probably need to say, hey, like this is what I need from you. But a lot of the times the boundaries we need to set are just things we're doing that we just need to stop doing. And like, that's it. There's no conversation needed. So that's been my biggest breakthrough. I don't know if you've had any like particular big ones like that, but that's been game changer for me.
It is that I had a breakthrough while you were speaking. It is that I had a breakthrough while you were speaking. Just because I sort of have this visual of how I've been creating my life in adulthood. And we talked about how it's just kind of like, oh, this is what we're doing now, and just went with it before versus now. It's like, well, what do I want my life to look like? What do I want my days to look like? How do I want to feel in my body? What needs to change in order to have that? And so it's like crafting my days, crafting my beliefs, crafting my intentions for the future. And in a way, to me, that is setting boundaries. It might not be with a direct person, but it's with my life. Like, what am I willing to do? What am I not willing to do? And so in the same way, where
so often we're like, well, we got to figure out what our next action is. Do we? Or do we need to figure out who we want to be and our actions will automatically follow?
Right.
Because so many of our actions, I would say 90 something percent, just come from our subconscious beliefs. We don't even know that they're there, but they're the things that have been shoved in there through us building up like who we are. And so it's like, so often I've been like, oh, I need to change this habit. That's been a huge breakthrough for me in habit change because I have had a lot of addictions and a lot of horrible habits. In the past 10 years, I've broken up with a horrible case of bulimia to where like there would be days that I was binging and purging all day long. Like all my money was going towards it. My throat would be hoarse the next day. Like a really bad case of bulimia for a decade. I healed that. There's still things I work on with it. Like there's still things I need to be aware of, like people that are in recovery. I stopped biting my nails, might have been one of the hardest ones. I was just a nail biter my whole life. I stopped drinking. I stopped almost all of my habits were not necessarily good. I eat in a whole different way. Like my whole life is different. And I struggled for a really long time changing any of that because it was always action based. And so I was trying to do something through my own will. And so, yeah, you can only do so much. You run out of willpower. There's that whole push and pull with the willpower science and everything. One thing that A Course in Miracles has really changed is talking about how it has a new perspective on willpower. And it talks about how will comes effortlessly when you're being guided by your subconscious mind, or this is a spiritual text, so it's kind of got opening it up to a higher power. So I've kind of gone from one step to the next that I'm working on now, but it got me thinking, and I wrote this whole journal entry about every change that lasted was because I first started to see myself in a new way. It wasn't necessarily the actions. Sometimes, yeah, I did the actions long enough that it started to change my self-belief, but more often I was really working on the self-belief and I was like, who do I want to be? What is at stake for this? And I like had to believe that this change was so important. And so that, you know me well enough to know that when I start to believe something, all of a sudden I'm very passionately driven towards it or away from it, depending on what it is. And so even now, when I go to change something, I call it brainwashing myself. I will read books about it the whole time. That's all I'm reading. When I gave up drinking 2 years ago, I read 11 different quit lit books, while also only listening to like quitting literature podcasts or podcasts about giving up alcohol. I joined the Facebook groups. I talked to my friends more that didn't drink. I bought all of the things, like all of the fancy mocktails. So I had a replacement. Like everything was about that for 2 months. And then all of a sudden it became really easy. And so often, like I said, we start with the actions, but we got to start with those beliefs, whether it's about ourselves, about the thing that we're doing. And that's what we begin to change. And then the actions just start coming naturally to me. Like there are things that are so easy for me to stay away from or move towards because of the beliefs about them. It's just another example is I'm very into nutrition and health, and I can go to a party and a lot of my friends will be like, I just don't know, like whatever, I'll just have this. And I'm just kind of easily, peacefully don't. And it's like, well, that's one of my just non-negotiables. It's the boundary that I set for myself. And then the actions become easy.
I love what you're sharing. And like one thing that was coming up for me as I was talking to you, I feel like we should have conversations like this more often because you're just like, so yeah, literally like I was just thinking about self-soothing. Like, you know, you're talking about quitting and like, what happens when you can't quit? What happens when you do something that you want to stop, whether it's in a dynamic with someone, whether it's in a dynamic with yourself? It's like a bad habit, arguably, right? Like whatever you want to call it. It's like a lack of an ability to self-soothe. Like I had this crazy moment where I built my business. You and I were friends then when I like built up my webinar, made a ton of money, sabotaged my business, lost all my money. I held on for too long. I was in a lot of debt in my first company. And I spent 5 years paying off that debt. And I remember, and it's a whole thing I talked about in my book. So I feel like people who are listening on the U-Turn podcast right now, they will know this moment from my book. But I had this reckoning where I ended with like hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And it was the day that I realized like my whole life was kind of like coming down. Like I had a sister who was dying in the hospital. I was losing all my money. I called off a wedding, and I went to get gas at the gas station for my sports car I couldn't afford anymore. And I remember this homeless guy came up to me. He's like, "Do you have any money?" And my sister, who ended up passing away, was homeless at one point. We did everything we could to help her, but she was homeless. And before she died, so I have a soft spot for homeless people, especially. And I looked at him and I was just so low that day because that was the first day debt collectors called me when I like really bottomed out. And he's like, "Hey, do you have $1 or like $10 or something for food?" And I looked at him and I'm like, "I'm $296,000 in debt." And he looked at me and he said, "Why didn't you stop at the first 10,000?" And I just was like, great question. And I just realized like my debt in my business was denial. And my continued choice to keep holding on was a refusal for me to self-soothe and be in the truth that it wasn't working and I needed to let go of my business. So instead of letting go at the first negative 10,000 or negative 20,000, I kept holding on. I kept going into denial, and I didn't want to sit in the acceptance and self-soothe my feelings and the pain of that. So instead, I kept just reaching and spending and trying to fix. And eventually the whole thing came tumbling down. And when I think about debt in my life now that I'm pretty much like debt free and have paid these things off, I think about how, when I spend money I don't have, which I have no judgment on anyone listening who does this, because we live in a world like, we kind of live in conscious debt, like we choose mortgages, which is like a very healthy debt for some people, right? So when I spend money I don't have and I feel like I can't control my impulse to do that, I'm not self-soothing. And so I feel like the question that I've been sitting with is like, how do I self-soothe? What are some healthy ways for me to soothe my nerves when life feels like a lot? Whether it's in a relationship with a parent where I want to react and like, or whether it's me setting a boundary and my body feels really scared that I just set it. And like, maybe it feels uncomfortable that I'm hurting someone by setting that boundary. Not that I want to hurt them. And I found that the dialectical behavioral therapy workbook on Amazon, I'll send you the link because it's so good. It's like a massive body of work. They have a self-soothing checklist, and it's like auditory ways to self-soothe, like visual things you could do, like candles are very soothing, or like what's that, auditory? Visual things, or like auditory, like music is really self-soothing. Like I have a playlist on my Spotify I listen to. So I hope anyone listening to our conversation, whether they're working through like parent wounds, mother, father, like stuff with their body, stuff with their well-being, like I think if we can at least give ourselves the gift of like, how do we start to self-soothe? And I think sometimes when people are honest, like you and I are, we're actually just emotional dumping sometimes, like, oh, we're just being honest, but we're just like unloading sometimes what we think is the truth, and maybe not even in a mean way, like in a like, this is what's going on and I need you to know it so that we can be better, right? And so I've been really working on this piece of like regulating myself so that I can make choices from a quieter place and a more calm, empowered place, because I don't think we can heal when we're stressed. Like, I don't think we can heal when we feel unsafe. So like, how can we start doing that for ourselves? I don't know. I'm asking the question. I don't have the full answer.
I found that I'm going to sort of get to the question in a roundabout way, because your experience of being in denial with the debt reminds me of I've lived a weird life, and there's all these pockets like every few years I'm with completely different people in a completely different spot and a completely doing completely different things. At least that was until like my late 20s. And a pocket of this was when I ended up accidentally in a relationship with somebody who was secretly robbing houses and addicted to meth and gambling his life away. And so I spent a lot of time in casinos, like a lot. And I was always in the high limit room, just gambling. And it's weird watching him and then also sort of feeling it trickle into my own space. Like I'd watch him and I'd be almost disgusted and want to do the exact opposite. And what he would do with gambling was that, because he would have lots of money at certain times. I didn't realize at the time is because he was robbing houses, but he'd have all this money and he'd hand me hundreds to kind of just get me.
Whoa.
and and he'd hand me hundreds to kind of just get me to go do my own thing. And I'd go to the massage place and pay off my bills. And then after a while, I was gambling as well. And I experienced what I saw him doing. And it didn't make sense to me at first, but he would be like pumping in hundreds and then he'd start losing. And then it just became like I could see his eyes turn and he'd just start throwing it in. It was like he was throwing the money away. And it was this self-sabotage mechanism that would come in because you start feeling a certain way about yourself, and then you create the situation for the world around you to match that energy. And so when I stopped using the money he was handing me for irresponsible things because I was starting to just go down with him, I felt that same thing where I'd be in the high limit room, like triple play machine, and just like hitting the button. And I'm like, nope, I'm not letting this go. It's got to hit eventually. And then I'd be gone. And then I'd just feel despair. I did that the same way with bulimia, where I would be like, today's going to be different. And then I'd be like, well, I can eat that one thing. I know it's a trigger food, but it's just one. And I have one and it tastes too good and it did trigger something and I have another bite. Like you were kind of talking about before, the bite that wasn't worth it. And so then I'd just be like, well, one more won't hurt. It's still like on the low end. But then I'd like feel this feeling in my body and I'd be like, well, I already went too far. And so I'm not going to waste this purge. It's almost easier to purge more food than it is to purge 3 bites. So I'm just going to go ham. And I would consume all of the food I could. I've done the same thing with spending where I'm like, I've already overspent 7 more Amazon purchases. And it's like, now I know, like, I'm like, oh God, I'm feeling this in my body. And I still feel kind of that pull to self-sabotage. It's in much less damaging ways these days than back then. But I know that whatever energy I am in, I'm going to create from that.
Yeah.
The more interaction I have with the world in this current state, it's like I'm creating my karma as I go. And so which book did I read that really changed my perspective on karma? It might have been a Ram Dass one, but it was talking about how we, especially in the wellness world, that we talk a lot about, like, I think people have a positive or a misperception of positive thinking to where a lot of times it kind of turns into spiritual bypassing or there are not healthy ways to do it. But I do see I now no longer think anything about emotions necessarily being negative or positive. I think that's part of the toxicity because then you are naturally rejecting certain emotions, maybe feeling worse about yourself for feeling in a certain way. But I try not to bring other people. I try not to create from that, like in what other ways it is. Like if I'm in a negative place, that is my right to be there and it's my work. It's the part of the like emotional fitness in a way. But if I go and I drag somebody else into it, that's the moment that I'm kind of creating the karma from that. It's like, okay, I just blew up at my husband. There's a karma point that I'm down. And so that now comes your question of like, so how do you self-soothe? And I think what I've done, and I think there's not just one way to do this. And so it depends on what state that you're in. But it took me a long time to get to the point of actually being comfortable sitting in my emotions. The most recent that I did that was when my dog died. And if you really have a dog that you care about, then you know the pain of that. It was like a human dying, and it was like my baby dying. It was very difficult. And I don't want to say that lightly, whatever. It was just very difficult for me. But it was the first time I knew what to do with those emotions. Like it's the first time I had a blueprint, and wow, did it hurt more, but it also transformed. I had no numbing agents. I wasn't drinking at the time. I wasn't partying at the time. I was at home with kids, like living a wholesome life. And so then I just had to feel it. And so I knew what to expect in a way because I had done so many interviews on it. And I was like, oh my God. And it really felt like my heart was being ripped out, like a physical pain. And I like could not hold back sobbing, like really deep tears. But then I could actually feel it moving through me. I could feel it changing me. And I was so aware. And then I felt this connection with him. Like I still can have like full on conversations with him in my head. It's interesting. And so at one point in this growth, it was learning to feel the emotions. At the next point, it was rather than expecting to know what to do, it was asking for what to do. Yeah. And following my wisdom as it comes, because it does change and different things do work for me depending on what situation I am in my life, what's working for me now. Like I just am evolving. And so that's true. And now, and it might just be because I've been knee deep in A Course in Miracles for 2 months, I'm trying to see what it feels like if I stop putting the pressure on myself to figure that out, even my own just higher wisdom. And maybe it's the same thing and just a different way to look at it. But instead, I've just been releasing it and asking God, Source, Mother Earth, like for a shift in perspective, not for anything specific. I'm not trying to create like what I want anymore, because at certain points that works, at certain points it doesn't. But yeah, you can keep asking for this one thing, but what if that's not the highest thing and you can't even think of it? If the people had asked me what they want, they would have asked for a faster horse, said Henry Ford. And so it's like, you don't necessarily know what's the best for you. And it depends on what you believe, of course, or how you believe it. But that has been really working for me. And that's been working for the mother wound as well, because I'm trying to sit here and logic it and like, well, where'd this come from? And what can I do now? And what we have done last conversation? And where did I go wrong? And there's 1,000 ways to look at anything. Actually, I would say there's infinite ways to look at anything. Yeah. And certain things will work for you at different times, and then certain things won't. And so something about this asking for a shift in perspective, I swear within like an hour, something crazy will happen. And it'll either just be like this download where I'm like, ooh, oh my goodness. And I feel like my heart opening and pouring out and feeling like I've been unfair, to like, actually the reality has just changed. And then we're able to have this weird conversation that I'm like, oh my God, we've never talked like that before. And so you can look at it as, maybe I'm just so willing that my mind randomly explodes open. Maybe I'm shifting timelines, and now my consciousness is at a slightly higher reality, and there's a version of me still caught in her shit one level below, but now I've just tuned into this level. I don't know what it is, but something about it is so magical. And that's what I'm working on right now.
Yeah, it's like perspective shifts are so powerful. Do you know what's interesting is, like, I was talking to you before we hit record about the polar bear photographer that I've been watching, and the other day he posted, we're going to have the weirdest show notes for this episode, like the DBT workbook, maybe a Ram Dass book from you, the polar bear photographer. But he posted about this polar bear that he's been tracking. So this guy I was telling her about, Florian, he like tracks polar bears and does a lot of video footage for all sorts of different clients, like Disney Channel, etc. And one of them, he had been tracking, and it was randomly found dead at 3 years old. And it's like, it was so complex for me, because I was watching this polar bear in some of his drone footage attacking a reindeer or whatever, a deer, and thinking to myself, oh, that deer is so cute. Like, I don't want him to die. And the way the polar bear was like biting into his neck, and like this little sweet thing that I could see my dogs in his eyes, you know, like the animal in him. But then wanting the polar bear to be able to survive. And he was posting about this bear that died because he probably didn't know how to hunt. And I was just asking myself, like, as I was thinking, like, because I've been a spokesperson for so long, like that was when I started to have that breakthrough of like, oh, I would love to be a spokesperson for like nature or something more meaningful to me. But I was sitting with like, how do we reconcile the circle of life, right? Like, how do we reconcile that, like, this bear can only survive if something else dies? Like, how do we make death, and how do I have a perspective shift on it? And I kept trying to tell myself, well, like, if somebody or something dies, it doesn't really know it's gone. It's not in pain. It's just all of us that miss the thing. And then it was like, well, like, I don't grieve every time I eat a slice of cake because the cake is gone. I enjoyed the cake, and there's going to be more cake. Just like people pass away, you're going to forever miss them, and there will be more people that touch you in your life, maybe not in the same way. So I've been really working on having perspective shifts. You know what I mean? Like, and so I love that you were talking about that. I feel like you and I could just jam on like so much stuff. We need to do this again really soon.
I'm down to make this a regular thing.
Yeah, we gotta like just have random life conversations. Maybe we should start reading books and like talking about them for everyone. Book club, like what we're learning, and do an episode about it. You know, I can't do the conspiracy theory books, but I'll love you through them if you're doing them.
No. I went deep there. I needed to learn, and now I'm out, and I I don't want to focus on it at all. I just feel like I know what's going on over there, and I'm moving from a place. I've unfollowed all the accounts I was following.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, maybe we need to do like some Ram Dass, like lessons learned and how they apply to life.
Thank you for having this conversation with me. And what are you up to? Because you're always up to something new and exciting. Your flow of life is just fun to watch. So
it's funny that you can. I feel like I'm like a whimsical and always trying to ground myself. I was talking to you, I know, before we hit record about how I wrote 40 TED Talks for my business coaching clients in the past year, and 39 of them I was able to book on the TEDx stage. So now I'm just offering that by itself. And anyone that wants to find out about that can head on over to ashleystahl.com/talk. And I'm really, really excited to be sharing that with the world, helping people tell their story. I don't think there's any platform that's helped me get my message out and change my business, both from a revenue and like a soul standpoint, quite like the TEDx stage. I've gotten book deals, spokesperson opportunities, and just like getting to hear from people all over the world that find my podcast or whatever. So if any of your listeners feel like they have a story to share, that's one really good place to find me. A lower hanging fruit way to hang out is my podcast, the U-Turn Podcast, YOU Turn. I also have a book in the same name, the U-Turn book, which is geared to help you figure out what you want to do with your career, and a lot of my self-development work and research from my master's in psychology grounded into a book for career pivots.
All the links in this episode will be at mindlove.com/323. Here's your challenge for this week. I want you just to observe and uncover. Do you have someone in your life that you think you really want to change? Can you look at that from another's perspective and ask yourself, is that what this is about? Or are you actually just yearning for acceptance? I think it happens quite often. I actually think back to the bully I had in middle school. As much as I despise that person for doing weird shit like burning my shorts that I left at another friend's house, clearly I'm not still holding on to this. Ultimately, I just wanted her to like me, which is why I tried so hard, which probably made me even easier to dislike at the time. I'm not going to make excuses for her. Bullying is awful. But I do recognize that almost every time that I really wanted someone to change, the reason that I wanted them to change is because I wanted to relate to them more. And so the way that projects is this deep desire to have them change, because we're not going to change. We've already come to our conclusion. We've already thought that our way is a better way. And so here's the question, or really the challenge for you. What if you shifted that energy from desiring that this person change, which is kind of a futile desire to begin with? What if you shifted that to just full acceptance? Because here's the thing, that's how projections work. Usually what we're craving is also what we're closed off to. So, for example, a lot of the times that we get angry or hurt, it's because in that moment we've closed our heart to somebody. They said something that hurt our feelings, they did something that felt like betrayal, and so our heart closes. And so we think it's that person that did it to us, but really, now we are cutting ourselves off from our own sources of love. Everything starts within. And so just in the way that you want somebody to change, wanting them to change is not accepting who they are. And that lack of acceptance means that you are also not feeling acceptance. It's a two-way street. So just contemplate that. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa. I love connecting with all of you there. Let me know if this podcast episode was awesome or what else you want to hear on the show. You can find all of my sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. Oh, I also need to tell you a story about this month's masterclass, which is all about meditation. I created a course on meditation through meditation. So basically, 5 days of meditation will take you through the journey of learning, understanding, and implementing a habit of meditation instead of just a one-off. Well, guess what? I have this Aura ring that's awesome, and it launched a new feature around stress levels. I noticed the first few days it launched, my stress levels were at like 6 hours, and I thought, this is horrible. This is not on brand, number one. And so it prompted me, do you want to take a few moments of stillness? And so I meditated, which the last few months have just been difficult with both babies and work and moving and all this stuff. So I went from having a solid everyday meditation practice to just every here and there. Well, I meditated, and I started meditating every day after that. I was on day 10, randomly decided to look back at my stress levels, and guess what? It went from averaging 6 hours a day to about an hour to an hour and a half. Meditation legitimately decreased my stress levels by 80%. So if you're not meditating, get to it, and I have a course just for that. You can find out more at mindlove.com/membership. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.